Welcome to On the Issues with Michelle Goodwin at Ms. Magazine, a show where we report, rebel, and we tell it just like it is. On this show, we center your concerns about rebuilding our nation and advancing the promise of equality. So join me as we tackle the most compelling issues of our times. On our show, History Matters, we examine the past as we think about the future. In this episode, we're looking at women in leadership, specifically Black women in labor and leadership. According to the Harvard Business School, and I quote, Black women in the workforce face distinct hurdles that require collective attention and action to dismantle. They say that many of us will be familiar with the economic racial disparities, among them a pay gap, where Black women earn only 63.7 cents for every dollar made by a white guy. Despite persistent obstacles, they note, including a lack of mentorship and feedback, a dearth of role models, and discrimination in hiring and promotion, Black women consistently excel in their chosen fields and rise to leadership positions. Now, in that 2024 Harvard Business School article entitled Black Women in Leadership, they note that, quote, multiple studies show that Black women in leadership positions are held to different and higher standards than white women and leaders of other racial identities. In fact, Black women leaders also often lack the support that white peers have access to. They say that at the same time, organizations often look to Black women to lead at times of great challenge, scrutiny, or tumult. Now, Black women and girls have been laboring in the United States for centuries, from cotton and tobacco fields to reaching the second highest office in the United States as vice president. But there have been tolls too. At times, Black women have been subjected to forced, involuntary reproduction for profit of others, and drastically, in the other direction, they've been coercively sterilized. In this episode, we will talk about Black women in leadership and the glass ceilings, glass cliffs, pink ghettos, and more. What are the mental and physical tolls placed on Black women when organizations hype their leadership but secretly underpay them compared to their colleagues or undermine them in front of colleagues? And don't forget about the conflicting stereotypes of being angry and domineering while also stigmatized as lazy and incompetent. Today, women's progress is not only measured by glass ceilings, but also by a rubric of terminologies and metaphors to describe obstacles to full inclusion and advancements. And this affects all women. These include glass walls, barriers that hold women in the pink collar, glass escalators. Those are the occupational segregation efforts where men in female-dominated occupations are promoted to leadership positions at a much faster rate. Think about nursing. Or sticky floors, where women are held down to low-level jobs that prevent them from seeking management positions. And you've heard more recently about the glass cliffs, where women in leadership are precariously positioned to fail. I sat down with three Black women whose careers span education, corporate leadership, academic leadership, and civil society leadership to learn more about these issues. I sat down with Dr. Rachel Westerfield. She's the senior manager of global experiences at Slack. Linnell Cadre also joined us. She's a university ombuds and senior advisor to the president at Emory University. In the more than 30 years that she's been at Emory, she has been a vice president, an associate dean, and dean. Joining us as well is Verna Williams, who's the CEO of Equal Justice Works. She was previously the dean at the University of Cincinnati College of Law, where she was a professor prior to becoming a dean. I started my interview wanting to level set a bit and wondering about what it means to be on top. How precarious is it? So first I turned to Verna Williams. What happens when Black women reach the top? I wanted to know. No one would assume that it's easy getting there, but do people know how challenging it can be once you've grasped the highest ring?
It's been a mixed bag, to be honest with you. At the University of Cincinnati, I became the dean after having been on the faculty for something like 17 years. And so I think that was a really big advantage for me. People knew me. I had been in some leadership roles ahead of time. And so there wasn't, and I was walking into the position, or I got the position in the midst of a bit of a crisis. So people were really appreciative that I had agreed to serve, or at least put my hat in the ring, and they were happy that I had been selected. And so it was kind of like the best way to go into that kind of position, which is not to say that there weren't issues that came up later, but I contrast that to my current position where, it's a blank slate. People don't know me. I walked into the position following a person who'd been in the role for 30 years. He was a white man. He was a founder, and what I experienced, it's nothing. There's nothing overt. There's nothing. It's more of a feeling. You sort of get this, like, what do you call the spidey sense? Like, I know that the honeymoon is going to be short. I know that, when you make a mistake, it's so fraught. And so, it's,
Can we actually pause there for a second, Verna,
yeah,
because you've
yeah.
said something that was really powerful in that, which is that when you make a mistake, it's so fraught. I think that's actually really powerful because we know that men, white men especially, get to make mistakes all the time and they float upwards. I mean, if you look at what's happened with Boeing and so many other industries, people float up even after having sacked employees, having run the budget into the ground, having done things that actually have come to the attention of Congress where there have been investigations and things like that. And there's a bounce. But as you've mentioned, with Black women, it can be so fraught when there's a mistake.
Yeah, yeah. And which is not to say I didn't have that same pressure at the University of Cincinnati, but at least there I had a bit more runway. I had a more of a track record. But coming into Equal Justice Works, it was different. And I was acutely aware of that. So yeah, I
Mm.
mean, I mean, I'm sure that Rachel and Linnell can speak to this as well, that even before you get to a leadership position, there's that feeling like you don't really have, there's only so much grace that will be afforded to you. You have got to be, at the top of your game, and there's a lot of pressure. It's a lot of pressure.
Although Verna was speaking to pressure on the job, the reality is that the stress, tensions, and worries have real health effects. The American Heart Association has taken note. Shortly after my interview with Verna was recorded, I came across a report that showed increased rates of high blood pressure and hypertension amongst Black women in their 30s and 40s, and the effects. In fact, a recent article on the early onset of hypertension in Black women shows that stress increases their risks of midlife stroke, and this leads to early deaths and disabilities. I wanted to bring Linnell Cadre into the conversation. She's been in higher education for 3 decades, and I was curious as to how she's observed these issues and how they've unfolded, and frankly, what they've meant in her life too. You are responsible for handling, in part, some of the concerns that come up with regard to justice issues, professional issues that take place that are not just race-based, don't involve just Black women. It's for an entire campus that you have to be mindful and work these things out and to strategize around these spaces. But I'm curious in terms of what you've learned from that space, particularly in thinking about this from a lens of what happens to Black women in leadership and or what even happened to be the pathways for them to come into leadership.
I've been in higher education for about 4 decades, a little over. And, I've been the first, I've been the only, from the time I started until probably the last maybe 6 years. And within the last 6 years, we began to see more and more women in these spaces. And it gets a little bit more acceptable to have women at the table. At Emory, what I'm observing that I did not observe, say, 10 years ago, was that I was the only woman back then, but now we have at least 3 women at the table most of the time. And so that gives you some leverage, some support in the room, some eye contact with someone who understands your perspectives. But you're right. I think every day someone walks into my office, a woman who struggles with their leadership, either being accepted, being heard, being ignored, being treated aggressively by men and sometimes other white women or white, men in general. And so we have to be emotionally intelligent enough to really think about how we navigate these issues. It gets really hard if you make a mistake. How do I get out of that? Because people notice that up front. It's emotionally draining when you're sitting at a table and someone that thinks that you're there to take the notes, right? It's really, really hard because you have to push through some of that. Or when you have a great idea and no one's listening, and then someone across the table says the same thing, and then all of a sudden, it's a great idea. It's a wonderful idea. So we have to be able to speak up and speak out, be brave, be courageous, do it with integrity, and we have to have courage.
I think so many women listening now, including women of color, white women, can relate to being at the table, a boardroom table, making the idea, people ignoring the idea, and 3 steps later, when Tom says verbatim what Julie just said, everyone nodding and saying, that's a great idea. And that is such a common piece. And since you're in academia, I think there's so many faculty meetings where
Oh
that
my God.
actually takes place all the time.
So, I've seen both sides of that. I've seen where um, some women get destroyed in these types of environments because the burden is too heavy. And, you don't want to underestimate mental health and how pervasive it is across campus or because it's real. And I think we have to acknowledge that it's real. But I do believe that there are more women today who are more Black women who are being successful in these environments because of our strength, our toughness, our mental intelligence, our emotional intelligence, our ability to be adaptable, and because we understand these environments. We understand it from the way we were raised or the way we were educated around these issues or our own personal experiences. So I think I see both sides. I see many people who are highly successful, but I also see people who struggle and who fail. That's real.
Linnell was not wrong. While women can become destroyed in work environments, still they are forging ahead. Today, women are earning more doctoral degrees than men. They are earning more master's degrees than men. And women are earning more associate's and bachelor's degrees than men, too. Moreover, according to recent data from the National Center for Education Statistics, Black women are among the most educated in the United States. You heard me right. An article in Essence magazine put it this way, and I quote, by both race and gender, Black women are enrolled in college at a higher percentage than any other group, including white women, Asian women, and white men. But has that penetrated the corporate ladder, law firm partnerships, or tenure? Rachel Westerfield, who's a senior manager of global experiences at Slack, reminded us that there can be multiple pathways for women in the workforce, and the terrain is not necessarily the same.
I think about this book called Our Separate Ways, and it was one of the early texts that I received as a gift from one of my mentors when I first started transitioning into the workplace. And it follows Black and white women up the corporate ladder and thinking about all the journeys that, we have a lot in common in that, okay, we have this chance to be at the table. We have what it takes to be at the table, but then being able to, they basically double click into all of their different journeys and say, what has your experience been? What assumptions do you feel when you walk into a room? And how do you prove yourself? And what relationships are you leveraging, if there are any at all? As you think about whether you're a woman or a man, race and class, what has your experience been to date, and how is that serving you in the moment to be able to join these conversations? And so that book made me start asking myself certain questions to prepare to walk into some of these rooms. What is against me? What do I have going for me that I need to pull from when I'm put in these really difficult situations at work? And just being able to reflect on my journey up the corporate ladder. What types of ideals am I up against? So I do think about that book as well. I thought that it was a really great way to start reflecting preemptively.
I wanted to pick up on something that Linnell said that triggered a thought about how, yes, we are in leadership positions now, but, you have to look at how we got to those positions, and that all the way, that like the journey is marked by lots of incidents that Linnell described, of people discounting us, people being surprised that we're, in my case, that you're a lawyer, not the client, people, you not getting the information that other folk get, different stereotypes about us. And we have to figure out how to work around that. We have to be
It almost sounds
resourceful.
like two jobs as you're talking about,
It
Verna, the
is,
kind of
yeah.
workaround. It's the being shut out of meetings that you didn't know were happening because you didn't
Yeah.
get the information that the meeting was taking place.
Right.
Not knowing that other people have been invited to something, but you didn't get invited to.
Mm-hmm.
Being told things that you don't have to be the face of this project when you are the project.
Right.
Right? Those kinds of things that people take for granted as normalized, which
Right.
in the space of literature is called these micro and macro aggressions.
Right. Right. And I think the thing that gets me through it is, first of all, recalling. I mean, we are in really unique positions now. Maybe not as unique, but I think about the women that came before me and all the stuff that they had to deal with and how awful it was for them. So, I've not, by and large, not experienced a lot of the stuff that happened historically. The other thing is, it's kind of recognizing, and maybe it's just saying, this is bigger than I am. This is not about me. This is about a system. And these folks are playing into something that they're not even aware of. And so it's I'm aware of it. I see what's happening, and let me figure out, how do I work around? Yeah, it's more work, it's more mental energy, and sometimes it's just frankly exhausting. But I think the flip side of it, and I think this is also important when you're in a leadership position, and maybe this is something especially for us as Black women, is like the upside of that is it, I think in some ways it maybe makes me a better leader. It makes me more nimble. It makes me more creative. It makes me less likely to just say, yeah, we can't do that. Like, well, let's just figure it out.
Mhm.
Um, and I think when I look around at my, my sisters who are doing it, other, because as Linnell says, there's a lot more of us as deans. It's incredible. I think, percentage wise, we are overrepresented as law school deans. And I see more of us leading public interest organizations. I see a lot of bold leadership and a lot of moves that are taking place that I think, frankly, we built on the stuff that was difficult and turned it to our advantage.
If you're just joining me, my guests are Linnell Cadre, the University Ombuds at Emory University. She's a former vice president there, and she also served in the roles of associate dean and dean. I'm also joined by Dr. Rachel Westerfeld, who's a senior leader at the organization called Slack, where she's senior manager of global experience design. Rounding us out is Verna Williams, the CEO of Equal Justice Works. She previously served as dean at the University of Cincinnati College of Law. We're speaking about Black women in leadership and turning to questions regarding both the pitfalls and promises of leadership. Here's Linnell Cadre.
So there's somewhat of a cliche that we're called in once again to clean up the mess when it happens, and we can either sink or swim. Some of us sink and some of us swim. But I think what's really we see this all the time, and I think that's why it's really critical to have an en masse of women around you, whether they're at your institution or someone else, so that we can seek the support we need. We can't do this work alone. I heard Rachel say, I think about it before I go into a meeting. What happens if this happens? Or what happens if that happens? And I was thinking about when you were saying that, Rachel, take one step at a time, put one foot in front of the other, but seek out your trusted colleagues, either within your organization or outside, and make sure that you're leaning on them and that you're available for them to lean on you. Because I think it's really key that we learn from each other and we support each other. And we didn't always do that. But I think now is the time for us to come together and do it together. And we have to practice that. We have to practice survival because we are not always in survival mode. We're exhausted. And so if we practice it, if we begin to practice what we really want the outcome to be, then it becomes a little bit more natural to us.
I'm thinking about we keep using the word exhaustion, and I think that that is a key word from my week to week, at least from my perspective. And I think that that comes from the work of work, or kind of what Michelle was describing, saying, all of the different ideas and the level of preparation and all of the different dynamics and politics that we have to keep in mind on a day-to-day basis. It really does add to almost this second job. Um, and, when Linnell, you're talking about leveraging relationships with colleagues as you kind of move through this space. I've been fortunate enough to have so many colleagues that understand that I am the only Black person, not just Black woman, in leadership in my organization. So when I'm in these meetings and I have these ideas and I'm glazed over and my white male colleague repeats it and it's the most brilliant thing anyone's heard, they come off of mute and they said, I think we all know that Rachel just made this statement. And that is a very rare occurrence, but I think it's also important that when we create these relationships on the side, the meetings that happen between the meetings,
Mhm.
you really do humanize yourself and you become less of just, a Black woman, one of which a lot of these folks have never worked with, and more, this is the brain of Verna, the brain of Linnell, the brain of Michelle that we need to make sure that we're listening to. She has great ideas and they're adding to the fabric of how we're developing this organization. So you become more part of the conversation because of your ideas and what you can contribute versus just an other type of person that they're not used to working alongside. And it really does help start to include you in these conversations when you're able to leverage all these relationships that you've been able to build. So I think that's been a key part of my experience as well.
So I want to help our audience understand just where this research lies and the breadth of it. And there's more than what I'm going to describe, but just taken over the last few years, some of the headlines, both local and national. Columbus Dispatch just a couple years ago ran an article, headline, "Can't Let It Defeat You: Black Women's Stories of Racism Faced in Corporate America." And then we get to the Boston Globe, how Black women are undermined in the work environment and what to do about it. That's from 2020. And then we get to Fortune magazine, "I'm a Black woman who quit the State Department over racial gaslighting. Here's why prestigious workplaces can be toxic for people like me." The Harvard Business Review, in 2022, January 31st. Here's this one: "The Angry Black Woman Stereotype at Work" by Daphne Moto, Jonathan Evans, and Alexander Ellis and Lehman Benson the third, unpacking what that means in the Harvard Business Review, this trope of the angry Black woman. In Fortune magazine, "The Microaggressions Towards Black Women You Might Be Complicit in at Work." And notably, all of this is based on research, right? The Harvard study that I started off with involved reviewing almost 10,000 people and their job experience to get down to the crux of Black women are actually having a pretty hard time in these workplaces. And notably, it's not related to their qualifications coming in. Some might say, well, they're having a hard time because they're just unqualified. But these are not cases of unqualified people, people who didn't have the resumes, didn't have the experience, didn't have the educational experience. This is, as some of you have mentioned, being what some might say overqualified for the job. Our grandmothers used to famously say you have to be twice as good as. My great grandmother used to say, and I think it held through multiple generations for better or worse: "Take care of business now, faint later." That our grandmothers and great grandmothers, they knew very well doors won't open unless we're brighter, smarter, more agile, more capable, able to articulate, amplify. What then does this hold for people looking to rise within these spaces?
That's a tough one. I think it's going to take resilience, it's going to take adaptability. But I think the one thing that we haven't talked about is how do we take care of ourselves, right? Because no one's going to do that piece for us. So we have to know what it means for self-care. For some people, it means meditation or exercise or eating well. But I think that it's going to take some self-care. And then I think it will also take just really understanding the human impact that it's going to have on ourselves and on each other. And we'll then need to support that. We'll need to support that, I think, too, in open dialogue. We don't talk enough about these things. There are lots of studies and there's all kinds of research on it, but we really don't talk about it day to day, because that might seem like we're being defeated. And so we have to do that. We have to celebrate every single win. And every day there's a win. So we have to celebrate, no matter how small it is, we have to celebrate those wins. And we have to keep track of them so that when we're getting lost in the shuffle, when we're really struggling mentally or physically, we have something to dig deeper and pull back from. And so I think that's going to be key as we move forward. And we just have to make sure that we're supporting each other. It's really key.
I was thinking that many of the things, I guess I've observed in just looking at the my peers, the women who have been elevated, have risen to these positions, that in some ways a lot of the conditions get worse because, in part, because it's so rare, or we're new in the position and it is difficult. I mean, what's happening is these women are butting up against stereotypes. We're not supposed to be there. What does it mean if a Black woman is at that position, and white men are supposed to be in that role? I mean, it's just sort of like the higher you get, sometimes it's more difficult, and so I guess what I'm thinking, I tend toward that glass half full. That's one of my coping strategies. I think that, and forgetting things. Um, is that the more of us go down this path, the less weird it's going to seem, and people will get used to it, and hopefully we will encounter less of it. The problem, of course, is, I mean, I think we are the generation, myself as well as you all, we have benefited from affirmative action and programs that were designed to increase diversity, and we took advantage of it. And we can look and we can see the great progress. That door is closing. And so, what concerns me is down the line. We're making strides. We're seeing, women of color, Black women in particular, in leadership roles. We've got a pipeline of folks. At some point that pipeline is going to dry up. I don't know. I look at, my daughter is at Harvard Law School. When I was in Harvard, Harvard had one of the largest populations of Black students. That class is now, what usually was about 50 or so out of 500 is now down to 33. So pretty significant drop. What does that mean? Is that the future? So I worry about that. But I will also echo Linnell's point about, so it'll become hopefully less rare, even though that's, we're on the fence. And secondly, it's so important to take care of ourselves, whatever, in healthy ways,
In healthy ways, in that you have your own board of directors. You have your own crew.
You have your own crew. You have your own board of advisors, your own kitchen cabinet. Yep. You've got your sisters who are doing the same jobs in different organizations or different spheres, because no matter what the sector, there's going to be similarities. Absolutely. Absolutely. You seek those people out, and you make sure you have community. That I found has been essential, in addition to your own personal community. But I find at times like this, my family, my friends, that they really anchor me and help me.
There was so much to unpack in this interview. The stereotypes, and likely you've heard of them, such as the angry Black woman who's stigmatized as being too opinionated or difficult to get along with. Or there's the stinging minstrel era caretaker, known as Mammy. Here's Al Jolson in blackface singing his signature tune in the finale of The Jazz Singer, a 1927 film. It was considered a great performance. Mammy.
Mammy, Mammy, the sun shines east, the sun shines west, but I know where the sun shines best. Mammy, Mammy, my heartstrings are tangled around Alabama.
A Jezebel documentary short offers even more insight.
Mammies can be traced all the way back to slavery. Their persona suggested Black women were happy to serve.
Then I'll take my nap.
That's a good little girl.
They didn't need citizenship and voting rights. They were content with their lesser social status in America. We asked Dr. Kimberly Wallace Sanders to explain.
After the Civil War, Mammy was the transitional object that the country really began to cling to, particularly in the South. Look at the Black Mammy. Look at her taking care of our children.
Indeed, for many, Mammy was the first Black woman they recognized in the workplace, and likely in their homes too. The first image in motion pictures, the first Academy Award earned by a Black woman was for playing the role of Mammy in the 1939 film Gone with the Wind. The brilliant Hattie McDaniel played the enduring, selfless maid in that film and did so in nearly 100 films.
Oh, Mammy, Mammy.
You've been brave so long, Miss Scarlett. You just gotta go on being brave. Think about your pa like he used to be.
I can't think about Pa. Can't think of anything but that $300.
Ain't no good thinking about that, Miss Scarlett. Ain't nobody got that much money. Nobody but Yankees and Scalawags got that much money now.
Red.
Who that? A Yankee?
Oh. Oh, Mammy, I'm so thin and pale, and I haven't any clothes. Scoot up the attic, Mammy, and get down Ma's old box of dress patterns.
What you up to with Miss Ellen's Portiers?
You're gonna make me a new dress.
Not with Miss Ellen's Portiers, not while I got breath in my body.
Great balls of fire. And my portiers now. I'm going to Atlanta for that $300, and I've got to go looking like a queen.
Who's going to Atlanta with you?
I'm going alone.
That's what you think. I was going to Atlanta with you in that new dress.
Now, Mammy, darling.
No use to try to sweet talk me, Miss Scarlett. I knows you ever since I put the first pair of diapers on you. I said I was going to Atlanta with you, and going I is.
Now, to be clear, Ms. McDaniel didn't speak like that in real life, but it was the way in which Hollywood and seemingly the nation felt comfortable with Black women. It was their place and role to be the constant caretaker and constantly subservient. What Linnell, Rachel, and Verna shared with me is that there is considerable hurt, embarrassment, and shaming that Black women too often experience in the workplace, expected to downplay their intelligence and ambition, stereotyped as being unqualified. And then there's the gaslighting from their bosses and the microaggressions and macroaggressions from colleagues and sometimes the people that they supervise. And all of this is quite real. Here's Linnell.
I've been reading this book called I'm Not Yelling, which is by Elizabeth Leba, I think is her name. And it's a Black woman's guide to sort of how to navigate the workspace, because we're often misperceived as yelling when we're speaking in confident tones or when we're giving directives, which we all have to do. And so anytime anyone says that Linnell's angry, they really don't understand me, because I don't really get angry. And so it really, I think that's a pressure that people are putting up on us that we don't have to accept. And it doesn't mean that we have to change the way we behave, because that's basically what they're asking us to do. Change the way you speak, change the way you walk into the room, change the way you think about things because you're angry. And so I think we have to be courageous enough to push back on some of that. Mm-hmm. And we also have to be able to be our authentic selves. Now, I've had people say to me, you don't really want me to bring my authentic self to the workplace, right? So we always have to make sure that we're in tune with who we are and what we're doing, but we have to practice being able to be ourselves.
I think that means too, though, if we should be able to get angry. And there are going to be things that happen in the workplace that make you angry, and you should be able to express that. I mean, I say that as somebody who's been told, now see, this is why I don't like to tell you stuff, because you get mad and I can't talk to you. And it's just like, what you're saying to me, and here's why I'm angry. Here's what's making me angry about this, to explain that to that person. And I think I was justified in my anger. And I think, any other person in my position would probably have that same reaction. So I mean, it's a trap. We're supposed to, just smile and grin and bear it. Or think of ways to make it okay for everybody else. And I think, to your point, Linnell, just be authentic. And sometimes you're mad, and you can say it. I'm mad about it. And you see what happens.
So the stereotypes that you mentioned, Michelle, I think, at least in my experience, the Black women who I have had the pleasure of watching, as mentors, they do have this natural sense of empathy and this natural warmth that endears at least me to them. And I think that it is easy to assign the role of mother to someone who makes you feel like you can bring, your highs and your lows to them. You can have real conversations with them. But it is also tough because you want that person to remain a soft space. And when that person has a bad day or a bad conversation or wants to express anything that is unpleasant, you try to box that person in. And that's when I think you start to hear angry Black woman is, well, you're now trying to escape this box of mother that I have checked for you to be in. And when you leave that space, it makes me uncomfortable and I don't know how to interact with you when you're behaving this way. Meanwhile, a colleague could, express the exact same sentiment, but because they're a white male or just not a Black woman, you receive it differently. And, I heard someone mention the idea of authenticity, and that is so tantamount to how I show up in all of these spaces at work. I think it's important to be brave and name the bad behavior when you see the bad behavior and at the, what maybe it's not during the meeting, but it certainly can be after the meeting, having these authentic conversations and letting people know that you're not afraid to stand up for yourself and coming with data and examples of why you've been led to feel this way. And I think that the more authentic you are in that way, the more difficult it does become for people to just label you as angry and write off your emotional experiences at work because you are a human being. And I think that, just keeping people honest and employing as much tact as possible and how you describe your feelings to someone else can really go a long way.
If you're just joining me now, we are talking about Black women in leadership. All women face challenges or can face challenges in the workplace, from pay inequity, sex discrimination, sexual harassment, and stereotypes about their capacities and capabilities. Much has been written about this, and of course, there have been so many lawsuits over decades and centuries. We've heard the slurs and the weaponization of the term DEI. It's become a kind of scapegoat for things that ail the workplace and ail America. For Black women, there has been an intergenerational challenge. Put to work long, arduous hours, and then stereotyped as lazy. Literally charting pathways to the moon as human computers for NASA, but then stereotyped as unintelligent. I wanted to touch on a third stereotype, the superwoman, the woman who has to do it all and carries tremendous weight on her shoulders. Here's Rachel Westerfield, a senior leader at the tech company Slack.
You were talking earlier, Michelle, about your grandmother saying that you do have to be twice as good as anyone else just to even get to the table. And I think, at least coming up for me, there were so many expectations on me from family and not wanting to disappoint them. And then also getting to the table, in academia or at work, just having these expectations of myself that I'm not allowed to falter and that, any blunder will follow me until my final days. And I think that it does kind of give you a bit of a superwoman complex that, or living up to a certain expectation that is even bigger in your head than it is for the people around you. And so I think that that can certainly, certainly contribute to how you think you need to show up. And then all the expectations of the people around you at work or in your family of how you continue keeping this face, and continue to just, carry that torch and almost seem not even quite human with how, the level of expectation of how you're supposed to react or not react in certain situations, and remain strong regardless of how you experience things or how things make you feel. That's my initial thought.
Rachel's comment also made me think of that movie Inside Out too, where anxiety makes an appearance, and I think sometimes anxiety that cultivating an image of being that perfect person, feeling that pressure. I think sometimes that's a protective mechanism. Like if I act this way, then everything will be all right. And so it's a way of moving forward and care, and so that you're not disappointing yourself, you're not disappointing your family, and you're the image of what you think everybody is expecting of you as a leader. The difficulty of that, even though it's about helping you feel secure in that position, is it's not authentic. Sometimes it's not authentic, and it's difficult to maintain. And there are times when you really do need to be, you can't be Superwoman. There are just so many things going on, and you've got to be yourself. So I would
Hard to lift up the building,
right.
to lift up the planet.
Right. And you shouldn't have to. We shouldn't have to do that. And that's what our boards of directors, our personal boards of directors, our sisters in this, they help us to carry that weight. And there are spaces, those safe spaces where we can be ourselves. But I think it is important for people to know, the people you work with, look, I'm human. I am not your Superwoman. I need you to work with me to get these things done.
Exactly.
We are a team. We are a team.
I reached my time with Linnell, Rachel, and Verna. As they noted, being kind to colleagues doesn't mean that your door is always open or that it always has to be open whenever colleagues want you to fix something for them. It does not mean that you've been unprofessional by being able to point out the flaws in how a project got done. That's not angry. That's just simply being a smart leader in a business environment. Our time ended thinking about silver linings, and I asked each of them about a message of hope.
I always think that it's so incredible to find community and hear, how affirming, as you said, Michelle, these types of conversations can be. The silver lining for me is that regardless of how many issues that we've all seen and all of the external factors that we have to take into account walking into every single conversation, is that we do have this incredible toolbox that we can pull from because of all of the expectations that have been placed on us to date, right? So without even comparing ourselves to our, white or otherwise counterparts, there, we are at a very special place in how we have learned how to navigate through these really difficult environments. And so whether it's our grandparents in our ears, whether it's our board of directors who are, in our corner cheering us on, or the colleagues that we have found community in at work, I think we just have the ability to pull on all of these things, plus the expectations that have been placed on us and that we've placed on ourselves to know how to continue being, these spectacular leaders. And I also think that we have the really great opportunity to mentor people who are, who are trying to come up through the ranks as well. And we have this really great set of skills to be able to do that and help them navigate and help them ask questions that maybe others didn't help us ask, and start encouraging that level of authenticity that I think that the workplace can be ready to hear, that they weren't ready to hear before. So I'm just encouraging that fresh look and the ability to really own how you're feeling going forward, and stop being apologetic, and stop second guessing yourself. I think that's the silver lining, that we can really step into those shoes.
And then for Linnell, for you, what do you see?
I love that, because I think it's women who have the capacity to inspire other women. And I always think at the end of the day that we're sort of these joyful warriors. We're good at what we do. We work hard, we smile hard, we're confident, we're energetic. And I think that's what people struggle with. But that's what inspires us to keep going. And so that's the way I like to think of us. I like to think of us as joyful warriors who can beat this and who can move forward successfully with each other.
And then for you, Verna,
I find
the silver lining.
the silver lining is what Linnell was saying. It's both picking up on both points from Linnell and Rachel. First, we are modeling a different way of being leaders. And I think that is going to have an impact down the road. And it's a positive impact in terms of how leadership manifests itself, both in the guise of the leadership as well as the style of the leadership. And so that makes me optimistic. The other thing that makes me optimistic is the people coming up. So, there are a lot of people right now that are in the pipeline. When I look at, our fellows and how they're so dedicated to making a difference, and how young people, they are still going into law school because they want to make a difference, that makes me feel really hopeful.
Guests and listeners, that's it for today's episode of On the Issues with Michelle Goodwin at Ms. Magazine. I want to thank each of you for tuning in for the full story and engaging with us. We hope you'll join us again for our next episode, where we'll be reporting, rebelling, and telling it just like it is. For more information about what we discussed today, head to MsMagazine.com and be sure to subscribe. And if you believe, as we do, that women's voices matter, that equality for all persons cannot be delayed, and that rebuilding America and being unbought and unbossed and reclaiming our time are important, then be sure to rate, review, and subscribe to On the Issues with Michelle Goodwin at Ms. Magazine in Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, wherever it is that you receive your podcast. We are ad-free and reader-supported. Help us reach new listeners by bringing this hard-hitting content in which you've come to expect and rely upon by subscribing. Let us know what you think about our show, and please support independent feminist media. Look for us at MsMagazine.com for new content and special episode updates. And if you want to reach us, please do so. Email us at ontheissues@MsMagazine.com. We do read our mail. This has been your host, Michelle Goodwin, reporting, rebelling, and telling it just like it is. On the Issues with Michelle Goodwin is a Ms. Magazine joint production. Michelle Goodwin and Kathy Spiller are our executive producers. Our producers for this episode are Roxy Zoll, Oliver Hogg, and also Allison Whelan. Our social media content producer is Sophia Panagrahi. The creative vision behind our work includes art and design by Brandy Phipps, editing by Natalie Holland, and music by Chris J. Lee.